Welcome to Powering the Future Within, the podcast where we explore the breakthroughs shaping the future of MedTech. I'm Omari Bouknight, CEO of Resonant Link Medical. Each episode, we speak with founders, engineers, clinicians, and visionaries who are driving the next wave of medical innovation. They're advancing technologies that are smarter, less invasive, and more connected than ever before. This is where the future of health lives. Let's dive in. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Karen Drexler. She's an accomplished MedTech entrepreneur, operator, and board leader whose career spans startup formation, commercial scale-up, and governance across some of the most respected companies in our industry. Karen has founded and led the companies that have brought the most to MedTech across an array of spaces, including point-of-care diagnostics. Her work on the boards of MedTech organizations is a place in which she really enjoys being engaged today. She's a champion for innovation, leadership, and impact-driven company building, and I'm thrilled to have her on the show. Thank you for joining us today, Karen.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought we could start a little bit with your background. You studied chemical engineering at Princeton University, and you seemed to find your way pretty quickly into MedTech. Curious as to what that path and that journey looked like for you.
Yeah, that wasn't my plan at all. So growing up, my dad was Esso, it became Exxon while I was growing up. During that period of time, there were a couple of oil crises, global oil crises, where companies like Exxon and others were investing in alternate energy. Our home was selected as an early pilot for solar panels, and we actually had an electric vehicle in the 1960s that we used at home. It looked a bit like a milk truck or a mail van, um, very kind of clunky, but we charged it at home. And I got interested in alternate energy. So I went into engineering so that I could work on alternate energy. And when I entered Princeton, there was a lot of money, a lot of grant money for working on solar and other forms of energy because of the high prices of oil. So my focus was on solar energy. I actually designed and built several different kinds of solar collectors during my time at the school. And I had planned to go to graduate school to get a master's degree in engineering to continue to work on alternate energy. During the spring of my senior year, the second oil crisis was resolved, and overnight, the funding for alternate energy dried up. And it took probably 20 years more for there to be interest in alternate energy again. So I found myself, the graduate program I was going to attend was shut down. There was no money to fund it. And I was trying to figure out what to do. So I interviewed for some chemical engineering entry level jobs, and they sounded honestly so boring. I didn't think I could do them. I was working in chemical plants, working in refineries, sitting at a desk and doing things like sizing pipes over and over for years on end. I don't know. It just didn't appeal. I had been working out in the field and building things, and I wanted to do more. So I went into consulting as a bridge to go to business school. So I went to Boston Consulting Group for 2 years in their associate program, and during that time was accepted at Stanford Business School and really wanted to explore other industries and other things I could do with my career. Unfortunately, during that time frame, my father was diagnosed with and passed away from complications of diabetes. Came on very suddenly. He was diagnosed as a guy in his 50s, diagnosed with type 2 or adult onset, which was almost certainly incorrect. He almost certainly had late onset type 1. And the amount of insulin that they gave him, which was only titrated with urine testing at that point in time, kept putting him into a coma. And he ended up finally having a massive heart attack and dying. So I got very interested in this medical field and this huge hole in taking care of patients with a large number of patients with diabetes a growing chronic disease where the only method people could use was urine dipsticks, which are completely inadequate, as we have found out, for controlling the disease. So I started gearing myself during my consulting and then certainly during my graduate education toward the medical space, and that's where I've lived my entire career.
Wow, talk about a transition. And I can only imagine in the 1960s with an EV, what that was like, driving around the neighborhood.
It got a lot of attention, tell you that. Well, the solar panels on our house also got a lot of attention because it was the first installation anywhere in the area. So, very crude initially, but I was fascinated, so
Certainly ahead of its time.
yeah.
And it's fascinating to hear about how the world we live in shapes our experiences, and then our experiences shape our passion and our desire to get engaged. So,
Mhm.
coming out of Stanford GSB, you seem to obviously gravitate to the field of diabetes, and you found yourself at LifeScan, which became clearly a leader in terms of
Mhm.
point of care diagnostics in diabetes. Would love to hear what the early days of LifeScan looked like, and what was that experience like for you over the course of 11 or 12 years?
So, I actually started at LifeScan while I was at Stanford Business School. So, Stanford brought in, I'm sure still brings in industry leaders to talk about different career paths. When I was in school, the leading career paths for people going to business school were consulting and venture capital. Those were the two things that people were most desirous of entering. So one day we had a speaker, a gentleman named Len Baker from Sutter Hill Ventures, one of the luminaries in the venture field, who spoke to our class and talked about his particular focus in the medical space. And he mentioned that he had just funded this new startup, LifeScan, which was looking to bring testing into the home so that people with diabetes could have a more flexible lifestyle and could have accurate information on which to base decisions around exercise and food. So after he spoke, he was absolutely mobbed by people from the class, all of whom wanted a job in venture capital. I finally got to talk to Len and I said, I'm not interested in a job in venture capital. I'm interested in that startup because I want to do something about this problem. And I ended up spending time with him. We really bonded. He introduced me to the CEO of LifeScan, Jim Wilson, who has been a lifelong friend, and went in, interviewed with Jim, and this was before we had cell phones. So again, dating myself. But by the time I got home from my interview with Jim Wilson, I had a job offer waiting on my message machine, my answering machine. So I actually did a project for LifeScan during the latter part of my first year of business school. I worked there in the summer between years of business school, and then they were hiring for a product manager, and I wanted that job, even though I had another year of business school. And I convinced them that I could do both.
Wow.
So I started basically full time with LifeScan while I was going to school full time, second year of GSB, and it was just amazing, and was there full time for 11 or so years in all different kinds of roles. Just an amazing experience.
Do you think that having grown up in a household, it sounds like you grew up in a very entrepreneurial household, innovative household, did that influence your willingness to step into a new concept idea, a new company? Do you feel as though that helped prepare you for that?
Interestingly, innovative, yes. Entrepreneurial, absolutely no. I didn't know any entrepreneurs. My father worked for a huge oil company. My mother was a teacher, very traditional professions. And really, there was nobody around me who was an entrepreneur. But somehow I became an entrepreneur. I actually started my first company when I was 12. I did a lot of sewing when I was a kid. I was very petite and there weren't clothes that fit me well. So I started making my own clothes and ended up designing children's clothing, employed women in the neighborhood to do piecework for me, and sold my children's clothing to a couple of local department stores. It's actually how I put myself through college. So, I mean, who knows where that came from, but certainly nothing that I saw. So, no, I would say my background would have encouraged me to take a job with an established company where there would be more security, but I just thought, I'm young. It's a good time to take a risk. Let's go do something. And I really wanted to solve this issue for people with diabetes. And yeah,
And
it's hard to explain.
well, it sounds as though just born and sort of focused on or enabled towards being an entrepreneur and something you've pursued for a lifetime and really looking at problems that potentially you faced or saw other people facing and diving in to find
Yeah.
solutions. Would love to hear more about the experience at LifeScan because the application and the implications for diabetes have been so significant, and you
Hmm.
had the opportunity to play so many different roles there. What was it like in the early days, and what were some of the different opportunities and roles that you were able to play there?
Well, as I mentioned, I came in as a product manager. The first role that I took on was actually for a product that was not in the diabetes space. They were developing the same basic enzyme based technology that they were using for developing glucose tests. They were looking for other enzyme based technologies that could be point of care tests. And one of the R&D engineers had an idea to develop a saliva alcohol test to be used for roadside testing or monitoring people who were on probation and parole, where they needed to make sure that they weren't consuming alcohol as part of their conditions of release. And so I was involved with a dedicated project team right from the beginning with R&D, marketing, manufacturing, quality, all in a little mini company within a company, if you will, which was a great experience because I got to take a lead role in specifying a product, figuring out what the needs were in the market, was actually trained as a sales rep and spent 2 or 3 days a week in the field as a sales rep trying to sell this product once we were able to manufacture it. So it was a great all-around experience. It turned out the product was just too different from the diabetes product in terms of the focus of the company and where they wanted to spend the resources. So the product didn't continue. But while I was working on that, the CEO, who I already mentioned, Jim Wilson, who always had a strong belief in developing people, he spent a lot of time with me. He knew that at some point I wanted to start my own something because I had this entrepreneurial bug. And he encouraged me to take on different roles in the company so that I could basically see all the jobs firsthand. So started out in product management. At that point in time, LifeScan was doing a financing. It was a tough time for raising money, as we have experienced a number of times during our paths. And the company decided to attempt to see if there was a good opportunity for an M&A. And Jim recruited me to work on this M&A project basically as a second job. So I worked on my product management job during the day, and in the evening, often the only one there in the building, I worked on writing the company offering document. I worked with the bankers and the lawyer. I had amazing experience working directly with Larry Sonsini of the famed Wilson
Wow.
Sonsini.
Yeah,
I worked with
yeah.
Alex Brown as investment bankers, and I was sitting there in the room as we were negotiating deals with major companies to see who would end up acquiring LifeScan, which ultimately was Johnson and Johnson. So that was an amazing kind of business development sort of finance role that was in addition to the product management role. Once the company got sold, Jim sent me down and said, "Okay, what do you want to do now?" And I said, "Well, I really like to build things. How about manufacturing?" And he was like, "Great, you can run manufacturing." So during college, I had some opportunities to work in pilot plants and had a little bit of engineering experience, but I was really underqualified to step in as a manufacturing manager for this fast growing glucose business, but that's what happened. So I stepped into the manufacturing role, which expanded to include procurement and manufacturing training and quality and a number of different functions. I loved it. That was about a 7-year long role. And the prior person had been seated in the office area. I got I've got myself planted right in the middle of the manufacturing floor because I wanted to be out there. And I sat down with every operator and did every job on that manufacturing floor. It was fantastic. It was one of the best learning experiences of my career because I learned how much the people who are doing the jobs no matter how repetitive or seemingly trivial to somebody looking at them, how much expertise it takes to really be able to do those jobs well and do them day in and day out and be able to see where all the opportunities for improvement are. Just really an amazing experience. I bonded completely with the people who were on the manufacturing line. And when I had my first child, I was still in that manufacturing role. They threw me a beautiful baby shower. It was fantastic. I'm still in touch with some of the people who worked in manufacturing at LifeScan early in my career.
Well, I can
Um,
imagine that there are a lot of
Great.
leaders who, when they lean into an opportunity like that, don't go all the way in like you did, getting that
Yeah.
hands on. So I can imagine they just really appreciated how engaged you were to really understand their world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I must say my soldering skills were not up to par when I started, but they improved a lot. Uh, so, but really every job on the line, and it was just the best because the first week I'm out there, I'm sitting next to people on the manufacturing line, and nobody's talking because their boss is sitting out there, and people are cautious. And over time, they kind of forget that I'm there, and they start interacting in a normal way, and it was just so rewarding. It was maybe my favorite job I've ever had. I just loved it. There was an opportunity farther along the way with another new technology where LifeScan was looking to put another dedicated team in place. And since I'd had the experience with the AlcoScan team developing the saliva alcohol test, I was offered the role of developing a very new technology that was geared mainly at developing markets, used a different manufacturing infrastructure, and just really, really quite interesting. And so I put together a team which again had manufacturing and marketing and quality, engineering, R&D, the whole thing. So again, had the opportunity to kind of run a small company within a larger company. And LifeScam, that was really part of the culture, was enabling people to raise their hand to get put into new roles. If you showed that you could perform in one area, it was never, "Oh, but you haven't done that before. You
Right.
can't try that." It was, "Sure, you've shown you can learn new things. Let's put you in something else new." And that's a culture that I love and a culture that I try to support in the companies that I work with.
It
Just
sounds like
fantastic.
there's a thread there where you were always willing to do something a little bit on the side as you
Mhm.
explored a new
Mm.
opportunity. Is that something that you've also seen successful with others that you've worked with, this willingness to lean in on the side while they get up to speed in a new area, a new function? I mean, you mentioned a few times now already that you picked up essentially something as a night job to gain
Yes.
expertise in that area.
This was before we worried about balancing life and work family, and I'm on the board of a sleep company, and now we worry about sleep. We know our brains need to sleep in order to recharge, in order to flush out toxins from our brain. Back at that point in time, it was like a badge of honor how hard we worked. We would compete with each other for how many hours we were doing things. So yes, I did see a lot of that. I actually hope there's less of it now because it wasn't really the healthiest lifestyle.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
it's
maybe
certainly interesting.
connecting those points, how would you recommend, or if you were to give advice for someone who's trying to break into a new field or into a new
Yeah.
function and show that they can do something new, but at the same time balance work and life? Is there, I know it's
I'm not the
impossible.
best one to ask, honestly, because I haven't done a great job myself. But I will say there are a few things that I did as I became more senior. When I started my first company, I I wanted to do some things very, very intentionally
Mm,
to be a role model, to show other people that it was okay to leave the office to go to a soccer game, to leave the office to go to a doctor's appointment. And it wasn't just kids, it might have been to take care of a parent. But I was very vocal when I left the office to go to do whatever personal things that I needed to do. I still was working very hard. I would often work at night after my kids were asleep, but I made sure people saw that it was something that I was modeling, and I was doing that because it was okay. I was encouraging them to do the same thing. I want people to have that time with their families, to be able to take time when they need it. If there's work to be done, I expect people to be flexible and to put in the extra effort when the extra effort is needed. But I think leaders can do a whole lot of modeling behavior that translates way more rapidly through the organization than saying, sure, you can go be with your kid. But if you as a leader don't ever take time, then people are going to be reluctant. They're going to worry about what that looks like. So it's really modeling that behaviors that I found was the most effective.
Right. That's great. So modeling the flexibility while at the same time modeling the willingness to lean into new opportunities to learn something new. And one of the other fascinating aspects of the story of LifeScan is the fact that that was encouraged. And it sounds as though you had great experiences even early on working with multifunctional teams, cross functional
I
teams,
did.
and would love to hear a little bit more about that because as you started to then look forward to starting companies, running companies, having that cross functional experiences had to be invaluable.
It was, and I learned as I think as a industry, we have learned over time, but I learned early how important it is to have communication across functions. I was never in a place where they used to use the term things were thrown over the wall into manufacturing, that R&D would develop products which may or may not be manufacturable. I certainly heard stories from people that I worked with in manufacturing, but my own personal experiences were that manufacturing always had a say in the early development of product. So when product got to manufacturing, sure, there are always bugs that you need to work out when you're scaling things up, but manufacturing had an opportunity to be involved. You don't have engineers developing products without the input of people who are speaking for the voice of the customer, because then you end up developing products that nobody wants or that you can't fund because nobody finds them interesting, right? So, really learning those lessons early was very material to thinking about the way teams work and companies function and how important it is for functions to be able to talk to each other.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And with the LifeScan experience, were there some key insights that you picked up that you've taken with you in terms of point of care? Because that feels like it's been a bit of a thread through your
It has been, and coming in with the experience I had with my dad, seeing how limited he was without having the option of doing things at home that would enable him to actually care for his disease properly. I've always looked for opportunities where other opportunities like that, where feedback could allow somebody to do something differently that would help them manage their disease better. Many, many people have looked for other opportunities like blood glucose monitoring where you need to test 2, 3, 5, 7 times a day in order to adequately control your disease, depending on your stage and whether you're on insulin, et cetera. There are not too many conditions that require that intensive monitoring. And people have looked. But I rapidly got into the respiratory area where I saw some parallels. I worked with a company early on that ended up exiting to a competitor in the space that was doing exhaled trace gas analysis and exhaled breath, looking for markers of inflammation, lower airway inflammation in exhaled breath as early indications of exacerbation of COPD and asthma. And that technology is out there now. It is being used a little bit in the home, hasn't really made it big time into the home. It is used by physicians, especially respiratory physicians. But that's a technology I thought was very promising. I have asthma myself. And if I could know 2, 3, 4 days in advance that I'm starting to get inflammation and I could be more diligent in using my inhalers to try to get ahead of it, as opposed to people ending up in the emergency room, which happens all the time with asthma and COPD. So that's another area I feel like the technology hasn't really met the need. But I'm hoping with all of the data that we're working with now with connected devices that some of these will become more realistic. Some of the other home tests that were interesting were things like coagulation testing for people who were on Coumadin. Of course, some of the newer drugs don't have the same risk factors, and so that has become a little less important. But building a whole business around something, you need to have a frequency of use
right.
for it to make sense to do it regularly at home, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah, and I think
very
we
interesting. It's
we
a
all
really interesting area.
It is, and I think we all got really tuned into testing at home with the COVID experience,
Right.
where all of a sudden we all were trying to use these at-home tests and certainly wanted to do that versus going out to a facility. So I think
Right.
in terms of how we as a society have become more in tune with the benefits of in-home testing, and you're right, it's all about, okay, what's the right application? Both my boys grew up with asthma, so I certainly know that if you can get out ahead of it, then it's so much
Yeah.
better than having to take them into the ER or to urgent
Yeah.
care. So
Yeah.
that's a great
Yeah.
application.
There are some home testing companies that have whole suites of tests that are doing quite well. LabCorp has a division that is focused in that area. There are other companies that have that. Most of those tests, though, are still cash pay. If you want to know your thyroid levels or you want to know reproductive hormone levels, and they tend to be kind of single use. They use them once, maybe use them
Yeah.
once a year. They don't have the repeat value. So those companies need to offer a broad array of tests as opposed to having one test that is used so frequently that you can build multiple companies around it, which was the case with home blood glucose testing.
Right. Yeah, that repeat aspect is such a key insight. I mean, when you
Yeah,
look at 23andMe, for example, powerful tool. One of the challenges has probably been the repeat aspect of it, or that doesn't necessarily exist. So that's
right.
a great insight on the diagnostic. So you've gone through this cross-functional experience. You know you're built as an entrepreneur. You kind of expressed very early on, even with LifeScan, an interest in running, launching your own business. Tell us about stepping into your first CEO role. How did you know you were prepared? And what did that look like for you?
Well, I didn't know I was prepared. I think most entrepreneurs can't really know until you get into that role how hard it is, how challenging it is. But along with a couple of colleagues, I had some ideas for things that could be done in the diabetes space. J&J passed. I did offer them to J&J first, and they wanted to stick with the manufacturing infrastructure that they had in place for the products that they were making millions and billions of sensors, right? And something that would require an entirely different approach to the market. So I left with their blessing and ended up co-founding a company with someone else who had been at LifeScan. When we put together some initial technology and went out to try to raise money, what I found very quickly was even though LifeScan was a big success, I think at that point in time it was the largest from a return standpoint that Sutter Hill Ventures had had. Very, very successful exit to Johnson and Johnson. I found that raising money as a young woman who hadn't run a medical company. I had run a children's clothing company, but that didn't count. Um, running a medical company was very, very difficult. I had investors who just point blank said to me, I don't invest in entrepreneurs that look like you. Not legal to say that, mind you, but I had people say that. And I got so frustrated that I went to my friend Jim Wilson, who was the guy who hired me at LifeScan, the CEO there, and I said, Jim, I need you on this team. I need somebody that they can look at who is going to look like somebody that they invest in. And so Jim joined as my board chair on a part-time basis, kind of 2 day a week, very active chair. And he came to the investor meetings and very quickly we got funded
Wow.
with an experienced older white guy in the room. It made all the difference. And that was certainly something I've seen repeated through my career, how difficult it is, even when you've got experience that you can demonstrate. If you don't look like what the investors expect, then it's hard. So that was the first thing that was really hard was getting money to get off the ground, get up and running. Once we had funding, it, these are never it's never a straight line. Maybe sometimes it is. My experience has never been a straight line. What you think you're going to do, you run into roadblocks.
Right.
The technology doesn't work right, or you get different feedback from the market and you have to change some features. So, a little bit of twisting and turning. But we ended up developing products that we brought all the way to market. We were able to successfully raise multiple rounds of financing. And I was able to build a great team. And again, some of my happiest moments were hearing from people who worked for me at that company, which was called Amira Medical. uh, people who had opportunities to do things like I had had at LifeScan. People who raised their hand, who said, I want to try that. And I said, yeah, of course. I support you. Tell me how I can help, but go do that. And over time, I have many people who I'm still in touch with from that experience. And what they focus on is that aspect, is the opportunity to go outside of my, whether you're an engineer or you're a marketing person, whatever, the opportunity to do something different, to broaden your resume and just open up the blinders for what's possible for future roles, I think was the biggest impact of that company. The number of people who have come back and commented on that. It's just really exciting, warms my heart.
Yeah, you can see that's very
So yeah, it's great.
rewarding
It's
for
great.
you.
It's the best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And so how about after that experience? So you've done it, you obtain an exit there, and is it this thought process, "I wanna do it again"? What kinda kept you going after that great
Yeah, so
experience?
that company, we were able to sell for, again, a very nice exit to Roche, Roche Diabetes Care. And I had decided I didn't have another idea at the time when we sold the company. So I was going to take 6 months off and rest because I had worked really hard through that whole period. And I still had young children at home. I thought, great, I'm going to take some time off. I actually signed up for a watercolor class. And me and all the 80-year-olds who were taking watercolor, it just wasn't a great thing. Plus, I learned that if you want to paint, watercolor is not the place to start. So I made a few mistakes there. But anyway, I decided that going to the community center and taking arts and crafts classes, that was not going to do it for me. So I started networking with people at Stanford, with people in the community. And I'd say within 6 weeks, I had connected to the company that I mentioned earlier, the lung inflammation company. The CEO there, this is technology that she had worked on for her PhD thesis and had started a company around it. And she was looking for her first outside advisor. I became their first board member, but again, in an active role, kind of like Jim was to me at Amira, where I was spending a couple days a week. And that was another great project. So I got very involved in that and then got involved in two organizations which were just starting up. They were started by the same founder. One of them is called Astia, the other one's Springboard. Astia initially started on the West Coast, Springboard on the East Coast, although they both are in both places. And these are organizations that were focused on supporting high potential female founders with initially mentorship and training, kind of accelerator like, before there were accelerators on every corner. So I got very involved with those organizations and started teaching classes and mentoring women and just helping women get their businesses off the ground. So, yeah, it just through those connections, I got involved in some other boards and other advisory roles, and it just kind of went from there.
That's fantastic, and
Really,
it's
really exciting.
so interesting how things have come full circle, as you mentioned, the sort of the service that Jim did for you being able to do it
Hmm.
for others and so to
Yep.
speak, paying it forward. I'm
Yeah.
curious because of your engagement with these leaders and these female entrepreneurs who are out raising. Do you feel that we've seen progress in terms of receptivity versus when you were going out and raising your first fund, or excuse me, raising your first round for your company?
So yes and no. When Kate started Astia and Springboard, the idea was these organizations would exist for 10 or 20 years. And over that time, there would be so many high quality female founders, female led companies that would get funded, that would exit, that the world would just realize that putting money behind female founders was a good idea. Not because it's a social good, but because it's a business good. Women tend to raise less money. Anyway, there's lots of data out there showing that women produce higher returns. When Astia and Springboard started, about 2% of venture capital was going to female founders. And you know what it is now? About
2%.
2%. So, yes, Astia and Springboard realized they were not going to be putting themselves out of business. This was an ongoing issue. And Springboard still has more of a incubator model, although they've gotten a bit more into the financing side. Astia, after the first 10 years, decided that they needed to focus entirely on the fundraising side and initially put together an angel investing network. I was one of the first 10, um, one of the original 10 angel investors for Astia to try to get money behind these high potential female founders. Astia now has raised, almost fully deployed their first venture fund and is raising a second venture fund. So the good news is there are a whole bunch of funds now. There are angel groups that focus on female investors, excuse me, female entrepreneurs, and getting early money. There's a friendlier audience. Certainly, women can often find places to present where there are other women. And by the way, I will say that organizations like Astia, like Portfolia, have also had a special focus on women of color. As if you have 2% of investment going to women, 98% of that is going to white women,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Women of color, the funding is so sparse, it's just so pathetic. And so these organizations have had special programs, special funds that are focused on women of color. And by the way, those programs are producing often the highest returns in those investment portfolios because again, these are women who are working with less. They're so passionate, they're so committed to what they're doing. They often raise less money, there's less competition,
Yeah.
often no competition for getting money into their companies, and the outcomes that they produce are fantastic. So this is something every investor should be interested in, because this is good news as an investor. You should be looking for people who are underinvested because they do more with the money. Uh, but yeah, amazing experience. I've met so many fantastic people, and so again, people who are going out who want to raise money, they can find early stage investors, funds that are people have maybe raised $10 million, $20 million, but the funds tend to be small,
Yeah.
and the follow-on investment is still really hard.
Yeah.
There
So,
are way too many venture portfolios. You look online, way too many venture funds. If you look at their companies, they don't have a single female
mm,
in their portfolio. They may not have a single person of color. And it's crazy, but
well,
there you are.
I
Yeah,
love how you position it that, this isn't about a social good. It's if you look at
not at all.
the returns are
Yep,
very, very strong.
yep.
So if
And there are
you,
plenty of sources for
and
that, for anybody who's interested that this, again, this is not a social good. This is, I mean, it ends up being a social good
right.
because these produce jobs
Yes.
and that's good for all of us, right? It produces return. That's good for all of us. But you don't do the investment just because it's a nice idea. You do the investment because people have good ideas and they're shown they can produce return.
So if you were giving advice to a female entrepreneur or an entrepreneur of color who is looking to raise, what are some of the recommendations that you would give? And would you give guidance to try to strive for a smaller raise given the dynamics, or would your advice be to go for it, raise the big Series A round?
Well, it's a sort of both. Uh, you so my first piece of advice is you want to surround yourself with people who can actually help you. And this is actually true of all entrepreneurs. When I talk with people, usually when you start out, you have a team of one or two or five. First of all, being a solo founder is a really, really hard thing. I encourage everybody to at least have a co-founder, have somebody to share who you can really talk to. If you're a sole founder and you have employees, who are you going to be open with about all of the hard moments, right? If you've got a co-founder, even if you're in different roles in the company, there's somebody who has that ownership, who shares your pain and can share the angst. So that I find is very, very helpful. But you're going to have a small team. You're not going to be able to cover all the different functions, all the different kind of expertise you want in your company. Bring on advisors. I encourage companies to put together boards of directors early. Don't wait until you have a large enough investment round that your investor requires that you have a board of directors. If you put a board in early of people who have been there, have done that, who will champion you, who can make introductions to investors who already have those relationships, it can make you seem much bigger than you are. Those are really important considerations for early stage companies. But for women and for founders of color, uh, get somebody on your board, get advisors who have been in your shoes, who know, again, have those connections, but who can relate to what you're going through and can help give you lessons learned from a firsthand perspective. I think that's just super important. Certainly, one of the things we've seen from an Astia perspective is that when you have women on the board, women CEOs tend to stay in place longer. If you've got all male boards, usually all male investor boards, maybe you've got an independent there or two, the initial founders often don't stand a very good chance. Initial female founders don't stand a very good chance of being able to build their businesses because the investors coming in just have a different idea
Right.
of what they think a CEO should be. And if you've got somebody on your team who has a voice in that room and can say, no, let's look at the performance, let's look at the passion, let's look at the track record,
Right.
it can change the dynamic. So not I wouldn't underestimate the importance of putting together the right board, the right advisory group, really essential.
Right. And as you say, I think there's perspective and takeaways there for really any entrepreneur for sure.
Yes.
So I'm curious, given all that you've done, and you're obviously serving on some very interesting, exciting companies. You're serving as a board member on some very interesting and exciting companies. How do you decide and determine where you're going to spend your time? You've done so much, accomplished so much, and I can imagine that your time is very much in demand.
Well, first, I will say that my last CEO role was a role that I took on from a board perspective. So I was on the board. The CEO didn't feel comfortable continuing to lead the company, and I stepped in for what was supposed to be a fairly short stint, ended up being a fairly long stint. But it was challenging for a couple of reasons. As an entrepreneur, I'm used to setting my own culture. It was hard to walk into somebody else's culture. And it's also hard to change a culture that's been established when it wasn't all that consistent with some of some of the values that I had put in place. But even more than that, I found as an older woman, despite having successfully exited companies and made money for investors, it was almost harder to raise money. In the last 10, 15 years, there are so many entrepreneurs, especially tech entrepreneurs, who have made a lot of money at a young age, start a venture fund, mostly guys, almost all guys. And I'd walk into a room of these 30-year-old men, and they look at me like, I wouldn't fund my mother. Why should I fund you? Completely discounting the experience and the returns. I mean, really impolite and such anyway, yes, it convinced me I was not going to certainly not start a company where I needed venture funding. What I found in contrast, being a board member, is they want you exactly for your experience, for the number of years you have put in, for the number of companies that you've seen, for the potholes you've stepped in, for the learnings that you've gotten from doing that. And I absolutely adore the board work because I feel like it's kind of the culmination of everything I've done with my career. I now actually can look at things strategically and look at the big picture and apply lessons learned and be helpful
Yeah.
to those companies.
And be
So
valued
so
for your
that's
experience.
yeah, that's really fun. The
Yeah.
advising work I do is more early stage where again it's part of the giving back. I'm trying to help young entrepreneurs, particularly women,
Right.
get their ideas off the ground.
I find it so fascinating that you, with all the experience that you've had delivering results for investors, that you could step into a room and have all of that discounted. Do you think that's just hubris, or do you think that it is this idea that the world has changed? I find it mind-boggling, honestly.
I don't know. When I was younger, I used to hear older women talk about being invisible, and it is really true. You walk into a room full of younger people and nobody pays attention,
Wow.
men especially, discounted. And that's really what I found in that venture environment. Sure, lots of hubris. These guys had made a lot of money at a young age, or you know, hopefully putting some of it to good use. Some of the things they fund we'll never understand, but that's okay.
Yeah. And then the board work, obviously, it sounds like it on the exact opposite of the equation in terms of value and the experience. For you, what does the perfect type of board role look like that you would just jump at the chance to step into?
Yeah. Well, I can describe the things that I asked for or asked about when I was interviewing for the ResMed role, because that is probably the perfect board role for me. So, first, CEO who was looking to add diversity to his board. So he had been in place for a few years. He had brought in one female director, but was looking to bring in more experience. Also looking for diversity of thought, bringing in people from banking and from med device and from the health system perspective, really looking to expand that so that we each have something unique from an experience set that we're bringing to the board role. I mentioned all the data around supporting female entrepreneurs. There's also a lot of data that supports that companies that have diverse boards outperform companies that don't. And so I want that to be something that the CEO is really embracing. There also is data showing that when you have women on boards, that women in the corporation are more likely to raise their hand for promotions and for opportunities because they see right in front of them role models for women who have done more. And I wanted the opportunity to be able to interact with women in management across ResMed as a resource. And the CEO said, yes, please. And at every board meeting we've had, and we have them all over the world, I meet with women. This last one, I was in Australia a couple weeks ago, and I met with a group of female engineers who wanted to talk about career path and how to make decision around the engineering ladder versus management ladder. I'm not talking about the business with them. I'm not talking with them as a director of the company, but I'm talking with them as somebody who has made it through that, who has made those decisions, right? Has gone through those career paths. And I love doing that. So that's one of my wish list items. I want to be able to be seen as a mentor and a advisor for women in the company as a resource to help there. I don't want my companies to conflict. I don't want to be in a position, since I'm on multiple boards, where I might have to recuse myself because companies are doing things together. So they're each in different disease areas, not likely to overlap. But it's really the culture of the company, starting with the CEO, that is the very most important to me. And again, ResMed's a great example.
Yeah. It's fascinating that when you think about impact, we often think about the big moments where you're on the stage or in front of a large audience. But I often think that sometimes the impact that we have and the impact that you're having is most poignant in the quiet moments when no one else is
Hmm.
looking around and people feel very comfortable to ask you open and honest questions. And that really fills someone's tank to keep going or to go in a different direction or to go faster or
Yeah,
whatever it might be.
yeah. And by the way, the men at ResMed felt left out, that I was meeting just with the women. And so we also have opportunities where the whole staff, men and women, can talk with the female directors, because we all have very different career paths, and we've had different perspectives on how we've handled things like work life, et cetera. So we don't just talk to women.
Yeah, and I think that's great because for multiple reasons. But one is that we're talking to people who want to be leaders and managers, and when you're leaders
Hmm.
and managers, you're going to be working with people who walk different paths than you have, and so be able to understand different perspectives from different people, I think, is critical for us as leaders and as managers.
Well, we also need men as champions for women, for
Exactly.
men, you know, we all need to be champions for each other. And the
Yes.
more we understand about the different potential struggles, the different opportunities, the different sticking points, the better we're going to be.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about now that you've been advising and serving as a board member for a while and all of those experiences and with your experiences with point of care diagnostics and your leadership in that area, it feels as though we're starting to see more and more of a convergence of diagnostics and therapeutics as far as technologies occur. Do you have a perspective on where all of this is going and how that convergence is happening?
Yeah, I'm thrilled that we're seeing it. So when there was a point in time where we were starting to focus on data. And the tech companies kind of descended into medtech. And they were right. They were making investments. They thought, okay, this is data. We can understand it. It's our field. And I think they, for the most part, quickly figured out that healthcare is a different beast than tech, right? And there are avenues in which they play, but the med tech community has really picked that up. The investment community has picked that up, and it's people who understand healthcare and understand medical technology. We have therapeutics, we have therapeutic devices. So devices themselves, right? More and more of them are actually performing therapy. There's some really interesting examples. One of the startup companies that I've supported is a company called OsteoBoost. It's a Bay Area company with a female CEO, and it's a wearable device, FDA approved, that looks like a small fanny pack. Sits on the hips, basically. You wear it for 30 minutes a day, and it vibrates at a frequency that stimulates bone stem cell growth. This is the first therapy, it's a device, first therapy that has been approved by the FDA for any category for osteopenia, which is the precursor to osteoporosis. So all of the drugs for osteoporosis have nasty side effects, and people don't want to take them. I don't want to take them. And basically, because of all the side effects, they're only approved once your bones are in such bad shape that you're at risk of breaking a hip, breaking a leg, whatever, kind of imminently. But your bones, for women, our bones start deteriorating when we're in our 30s. For men, it happens a little later. But osteopenia is present in virtually every postmenopausal woman and in a lot of men who've gone through, maybe men who take steroids for asthma control or steroids for other reasons. Anybody who's been through chemotherapy probably has weakened bones. And this is an amazing therapy that is a device. It's a connected device. It has data. So it's like a convergence of all these things at once. And it's a whole new category of device treating a new category of this osteopenia category where there's been nothing before other than, take walks and drink milk,
Right.
right? That's kind of the advice.
Yeah.
So really fascinating what this opens up
Yeah.
in terms of new opportunities by combining these different elements to treat things we previously weren't treating.
Yeah. And I love the concept of earlier detection and more precise detection combined with lower invasiveness equals earlier treatment equals prevention. That's fascinating. That's
Yeah, the
fascinating.
hope certainly is that as people, right now it's women, but when it's approved more broadly, as people use these devices, hopefully they don't ever progress to osteoporosis. Maybe it can be arrested at osteopenia,
Yes.
where there's still some risk, but not the very high risk of osteoporosis.
Yeah. And there's so many parallels there in terms of appropriate treatment of type 2 diabetes, for example,
Hmm.
and preventing the progression
Yep.
thereof. And I think that
Yeah.
can be applied to so many different areas
Right.
within healthcare.
Well, you look at the sensors now that are approved for over the counter, right? These are the glucose sensors initially approved for people who were taking insulin and now have been approved more generally for the population. You can purchase them as a consumer, and they're now part of diet and exercise programs and all sorts of other lifestyle modification activities because the information is so important. Not to mention, if you start seeing abnormal peaks or long elevations of glucose without diminishment, it's an indication that people should get tested for potential onset of diabetes. Right. So if that can be caught earlier and treated, that's a huge one.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels
And
like we're,
people are looking at that platform, by the way, that sensor platform for measuring other biological fluids and
yes.
being able to treat other conditions, whether it's hormone monitoring or electrolytes. There are lots of different things that you can imagine tracking, both for wellness, lifestyle kinds of purposes, but also for actual health.
Yeah. I'm curious, are there any consumer based trackers? There's so many out there. Are there any that you find useful and that you use on a daily basis or day-to-day basis?
I do use the Lingo sensor. As we talked about earlier, there's diabetes in my family. There's more than just my dad. There's diabetes is pretty widespread. And so watching the impact of foods in particular on my blood glucose levels is very important to me. I don't wear it all the time, maybe every other, it's a 2-week sensor. So, once a month, but I wear it frequently. I have my Apple Watch and I am particularly interested in the sleep metrics, and I use it for exercise as well. Those are the ones that I use at the moment, but I've gone through Aura rings and Fitbits and lots of other things, and I'm sure I will end up with other devices in the future. It's totally fascinating. I do think our future will include more and more wearables where they cross the line. Maybe they're consumer devices, but they have some indications that are medical, that are either FDA approved or where they have an indication that might cause someone to go and get screened. And a good example, I mentioned ResMed earlier, is the sleep apnea detector in the Apple Watch that
Right.
causes people to go in and get screened. There are an estimated billion people globally with sleep apnea, and something like 90% of them are undiagnosed. And this is for younger people, this is the leading cause of heart attack and stroke, and it's really a dangerous condition that a lot of people are not aware of. They think they're just snoring or they're not sleeping well. And so having that trusted device that says, maybe you should go you get checked. There are home devices that you can use to check and get monitored for sleep quality, for, you know, anyway, there are just so many opportunities to
Yeah,
get
there
on top of some of these really serious chronic diseases.
ton of opportunity, and the
Yeah,
blurring of the line between consumer and medical is very interesting and
it
fascinating.
is.
Having been in medtech for such a long time, I'm sure that you've seen things like I've seen, which are you look at these big markets and trying to understand adoption patterns are so difficult. But it could be
Mhm.
maybe as we move and migrate to more consumer like diagnostic capability, that's what unlocks the treatment more.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as we transition here on having worked with so many entrepreneurs and in so many different fields, what's a couple pieces of advice that you would give to someone who's early in their career thinking about starting or joining a very innovative company? Any pieces of advice for our medtech entrepreneurs out there?
In terms of starting companies, I would say first make sure that you really have identified the need. As somebody who's invested in companies and sees pitches all the time, I see way too many companies that are formed because somebody has fallen in love with their technology. And this especially happens for things that are coming out of academia, where there's a technology that maybe somebody worked on for their PhD and they want to form a company around it, and they're out looking for a problem to solve with their technology. And in my experience, that often, probably most often, usually, I would say, doesn't work. You really need to start with the opportunity first, which is why programs like the Stanford Biodesign, which has now been expanded to places all over the globe, where they teach about fact finding, need finding to figure out where there are holes in patient care, in what doctors need. Start with the need. If you start with the need and then figure out what technologies can be applied to solve that problem, you're much more likely to get to a solution. Say the second thing is make sure that you know that there's somebody who's going to pay for it. Unfortunately, in our healthcare system, reimbursement is a big deal. There are lots of products that get rolled out as cash pay. People are going to pay for it out of pocket initially with the expectation they're going to get reimbursement. And that is difficult. It's a difficult path to get new reimbursement codes. So if you can start with something, even if you start with cash pay, but know that there is a path to reimbursement, that there are codes that already exist that you maybe can combine or do something innovative around the way things are coded. I'm a big fan of technologies that can be made available to the broader population. I know people have been very successful bringing out technologies that are expensive that only the wealthy can afford. Right? So there are those companies that are out there, but I think these days to get the biggest interest in your company, it should be something that maybe it evolves from cash pay to reimburse, but it should be something that could be applied to everyone. We already have so much inequality in our healthcare system. We need more entrepreneurs who are thinking about how to get healthcare to the people who are more whose coverage is more marginal.
Right.
Which is actually such a huge opportunity in these days of digital health and being able to multiplex what doctors can do by taking away the routine tasks, letting them see more patients, letting them visit with patients in their homes. We've seen improvement in enrollment in clinical trials by being able to allow for remote monitoring of patients. So many opportunities with where technology is now to just do a better job of getting healthcare out there. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're passionate about that, uh, eh, this is the good time to work on those problems.
This is the good time to work on those problems. We
Yep,
have a lot of work to do, but therein
we
is the
do.
opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this has been incredible. We really appreciate you joining today and hearing your story and hearing about your journey and the impact that you're having on the lives of so many.
Thank you so much. It's really been fun to talk with you, Omari.
It has been. Thank you, Karen. And then thank you to
Thank
all
you.
of you for joining us today on Powering the Future Within. If this conversation inspired you, follow the show and share it with your MedTech community. I'm Omari Bouknight. Stay inspired and keep innovating.